Their next private conversation, described by a close observer as strained beyond recovery, marked a turning point, not just in their marriage, but in their political standing. Camilla began to interpret every glance, every delay, every pause from Charles as a betrayal in disguise, and her circle, growing bolder in their loyalty, branded the rejection not as a procedural formality, but as a calculated power move. One advisor was even quoted saying, "They want her erased. This is how it starts." But the real shock wasn't in what Camilla lost. It was in what Catherine gained, and how quickly it escalated beyond heirlooms into something far more political. These weren't just antiques and jewels. They were coded messages. As historians and insiders pored over the transferred items, a chilling realization unfolded. Lord Mountbatten Windsor was reviving an unspoken lineage, one rooted in wartime loyalty and dynastic preservation. The inventory that emerged from the sealed crates was anything but ordinary. What Catherine had received was not a mere collection of trinkets, but a tapestry of symbols, each piece carefully curated, each artifact echoing with unspoken intent. First came the sapphire pendant once worn by Queen Victoria, a gem historically reserved for women deemed essential to the monarchy's moral axis. Then the naval war scrolls signed by Edward VIII before his abdication, once believed to be lost to private archives, now appeared in pristine condition as though waiting for the right recipient. And among the most controversial, a delicate locket, long whispered about, but never publicly confirmed. The locket of Sophia, said to contain a miniature portrait of a forgotten royal child born during exile. That piece alone reopened decades-old whispers about bloodlines, legitimacy, and royal cover-ups. But it wasn't just the contents that sent tremors through the institution. It was how they were presented. Each item bore the jewel seal of Lord Mountbatten's crest, and more shockingly, Queen Mary's personal inscription. The implication was unmistakable. These were not private family tokens. They were historical instruments, once wielded by monarchs to convey unspoken intent. Most haunting of all was the discovery of a velvet box, marked only with the initials "Error." For days, speculation ran wild. Some claimed it referenced Queen Elizabeth and her mother. Others suggested it pointed to three royal women who had shaped internal council: Elizabeth, Rose, and Alice. Whatever its exact meaning, the message was unmissable. It was a code of trust, passed to those chosen to preserve the bloodline's dignity from within. According to insiders, the language used was not suggestive, but declarative. It wasn't a request. It was an assumption of entitlement. What Camilla didn't anticipate was that the vaults she sought had already become the backdrop of another far more consequential transfer, one that would cast her ambitions into the shadows. Only 3 days after Camilla's documentation was submitted, Lord Mountbatten Windsor finalized his private arrangement with Catherine. That proximity, so tight it bordered on deliberate provocation, sent shockwaves through the palace's upper ranks. When the letter of rejection was returned to Camilla's desk, it bore not the typical emblem of administrative deferral, but the personal crest of Mountbatten himself. And the tone was not diplomatic. It was decisive. Storage within the royal vaults is not granted for items beyond the direct lineage of duty. The letter stated, "Preservation must not be confused with projection. Unauthorized expansions of personal influence will not be accommodated under this legacy." Those words, now echoing within palace walls, were more than a denial. They were a reprimand. Camilla, by all accounts, was blindsided. She had expected compliance. Instead, she was handed humiliation. Sources close to her described the moment she read the letter as one of frozen silence, before she tore it from its envelope and cast it aside with trembling hands. Her aides, sensing the fallout, attempted immediate damage control, requesting clarification from Clarence House and Balmoral's Estate Council. But the response was firm. The decision was final, endorsed, and recorded. There would be no reversal, no compromise. Camilla's request was dead before it even had breath. Charles, placed once again in an impossible position, attempted to quell the rising tension with quiet appeals to both sides. Yet his efforts came too late. The very fact that he hadn't intervened before the letter was dispatched became a silent verdict. Inaction in this case was a choice, and Camilla recognized that with piercing clarity, and though the reasons given were veiled in vague administrative language, whispers inside the inner corridors suggest a quiet storm had already been brewing. The denial was not bureaucratic, it was deliberate. Inside one of the crates, nestled in royal silk, was a hand-pinned letter from Lord Mountbatten himself. Though brief, it was precise in its intent. He wrote not of honor or privilege, but of responsibility. Preservation of legacy, the letter read, must never fall into the hands of those seeking lineage without burden. The implication was sharp. The message was clear. This was not a gift, it was a judgment. Catherine, upon reading the words, did not reject the crates nor demand clarification. She didn't consult Charles, nor did she defer to palace protocol. She accepted them, not with triumph, but with gravity. Witnesses say she directed that the heirlooms be handled with utmost care, personally overseeing their temporary placement within a private wing. Her face, they said, held no glee, only a quiet, almost reluctant understanding. A turning pointer had just unfolded, and she bore the weight of it silently. But as whispers turned into war cries behind palace walls, one question echoed louder than the rest. Why, Catherine? And why now? Behind every royal wall lies a confrontation waiting to erupt. When Camilla formally requested the use of Balmoral's historic vaults for her own family's collection, she expected courtesy. What she received instead was rejection, and a chilling written reply from Lord Mountbatten Windsor that drew a line in the sand. The request on paper seemed routine, a formal appeal submitted to estate custodians for the temporary placement of Parker Bowles' family artifacts. Camilla had long expressed a desire to secure her family's legacy within the grandeur of royal infrastructure, suggesting that such items be housed alongside Windsor holdings. But the proposal, though dressed in civility, carried deeper tones of permanence. The British royal family was blindsided by a move no one anticipated. Without warning, Lord Mountbatten Windsor initiated a private transfer of some of the monarchy's most treasured heirlooms, not to King Charles, nor to Queen Camilla, but directly to Catherine, Princess of Wales. What began as a quiet gesture has now ignited a firestorm within the House of Windsor. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began with a single unannounced vehicle arriving at the gates of Kensington Palace, one that bore no palace insignia but carried the weight of centuries inside. Lord Mountbatten Windsor himself, known for operating in shadows even among the elite, stepped out without ceremony. No formal invitation, no palace statement, just his presence alone was enough to set security on edge. What followed was even more perplexing. 3 sealed crates, each one adorned with the unmistakable Mountbatten crest, were quietly rolled into the residence under heavy discretion. Not a single staff member had advanced knowledge. The halls were silent, the atmosphere electric with unease. The crates were not opened immediately. Catherine, upon being summoned, reportedly stood in a moment of stillness as she took in the emblem on the wax seals, one historically reserved for items passed only to those deemed keepers of legacy within the inner royal line. The absence of any prior communication from Buckingham Palace or Clarence House turned this delivery from curious to controversial. Sources say senior aides scrambled to confirm whether the king had authorized such a transfer. The answer came back sharp and cold. No, he had not. What heightened the mystery further was the timing. Just days prior, Queen Camilla had formally submitted a request to store a curated selection of Parker B's family heirlooms at one of the royal estate vaults, an act which, while not unusual, had drawn concern from archivists due to a lack of precedent. That request, now in damning retrospect, had been denied,